All right, how's it going, everybody? Today you're going to be looking at classifying living things. So we've kind of looked in already into the six kingdoms. We've also looked at um, plants. We looked at fungi, bacteria. So a lot of different types of organisms. I thought we'd go back and really take a look at how we classify living things and why it's important. So why do we classify? So there's so much variety of living things between plants, animals, and bacteria. Um, Classification um, allows us to keep track of all those living things. What it is it's a grouping of organisms into categories, and you base that grouping on their physical characteristics, so how similar they are, as well as their evolutionary relationships. So when this first started, there was no evolutionary evidence or relationships. Um, there were no evolutionary relationships, and so it's just based on physical appearance. So you could imagine that things with wings would have been grouped together. It would have been on basic physical traits that were similar. Um, and as we've progressed further in the last 200 years, now we can use genetic evidence, so we can test DNA similarities and look at how closely related organisms are based on their appearance, development, as well as their genetic similarities. The science of classifying things is called taxonomy, and people have been doing it for nearly 2,000 years. So in some form or the other, people have been looking at the varieties of life around them and figuring out how they can fit things together and what might be ways that they could group living things. Starting on this page here, I'll just kind of talk about when you're taking notes, how you might take notes on a page like this. Um, the very first part here is just letting you know why we classify, so it allows us to keep track of all living things. You don't have to write that word for word. You could just write, allows us to keep track of millions of living things. For classification, you've got a definition here. It's underlined, but you don't have to write the full definition. All you need to know is that's a grouping of organisms in categories, and the basis for it is based on evolutionary relationships and physical appearance. And then this is kind of just a fun fact at the end. You're not going to have to know that people, I'm not going to ask a question, how long have people been classifying? It's just kind of for your own information on how long people have been classifying organisms. Okay, we'll move on to the next section. We'll start to talk about scientific naming and how it was developed. So the scientist who came up with it, his name was Carolus Linnaeus. He developed a system for naming species and organizing them into groups. And he did this with over 4,000 plants and animals. He didn't have the sophisticated genetic sequencing and the ability to look at the DNA of an organism, so he's using appearance to group species. He's considered the father of taxonomy, and the system that he used is called binomial nomenclature. In the next slide, we're going to break down that word binomial nomenclature, talk about what it means and how it applies to science. And we'll also talk about why it's important. I'll wait to the next slide to talk about why it's important. Okay, so breaking down the word, binomial, you've got that prefix bi, meaning two, nomial name, so it's to name, and then nomenclature means naming system, so it's a two-name or two-word naming system. The language that's used for the words is Latin, and here's three examples. You don't have to write all of them, but you just want to take away the basic idea that you have common names for organisms, like a house cat, or a mountain lion, puma, or cougar, or a bobcat. The mountain lion is a really good example because here you're seeing three of the common names, mountain lion, puma, and cougar. They're all referring to this scientific name, Felis concolor, and here's our mountain lion. So these three words, mountain lion, puma, and cougar, all mean the same thing. They're all referring to this animal here. If you went to different parts of the United States or different regions and areas, they'd use different names depending on the area. That's why it's helpful to have a scientific name. That way you could be anywhere. You could be in Oregon, you could be in California, you could be in Will's backyard, and you'd use the same name to refer to this animal. The two names that you see here, the two Latin words, refer to the genus and the species. It's always capitalized and always lowercase, and both are always italicized. And genus and species are the most specific levels of organization. What I'd like you to think of is if I made a pyramid right here and turned it on its end, at the widest part of the pyramid at the top, you could think of something that's very unspecific, like the organism is a living thing. That would include a lot of different organisms. The scientific name uses the genus and species, so that would be like the narrow end of the pyramid down here, and that's the most specific level. When you use the scientific name, you're talking about just one organism. You're talking about just the bobcat. You're talking about just a mountain lion. So that's the most specific level of organization. So that's how the naming system works. And now we're going to look at all 7 levels of classification, going from the least complex to the most complex. Or I mean the least informative and the most informative on classification of the species. So you don't have to draw this whole chart out. As long as you have your headphones in, you're going to hear me say that. If not, you're going to start writing it because you see it all on the page. What you want to take away from this slide are, first of all, this part right here. You want to know that this is the levels of classification: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. You want to know them in order, that this is least complex and this is most complex. And if you look at kingdom, that's when we learned about the 6 kingdoms. And now what we're focusing in on is we'll be looking more into detail into the phylum for animals. So in this example, you've got 3 different organisms that are in the kingdom Animalia. They're all 3 in the phylum Chordata. And they're all 3 mammals. So all 3 of them have that in common. Once you get to the order, though, they start to differentiate. So Bill Nye the Science Guy, he's a primate, and the bear and the dog are both part of the order Carnivora. So they're going to separate from Bill Nye at this point. And then once we get to family, our polar bear and our dog over here, they're going to separate at family as well. So polar bear is going to go into Ursidae, and the dog's going to go into Canidae. And then we have genus and species. So if you look at the person next to you in class with their headphones on, watching the video, they would all be classified in the same way as Bill Nye. So same kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The other thing I want you to take away from this slide is that the more levels of organization that 2 organisms share, the more closely related the 2 organisms are. So in this example, the bear and the dog are more closely related than to Bill Nye. He's the least closely related to the 3, or to the 2. The other thing that we did in the other classes, we came up with a quick mnemonic to remember this, and we said King Philip can't order fried green snakes. pretty sure that's the mnemonic we use. So when trying to remember a list like this and a list in order, it's really helpful to come up with a mnemonic. You could even picture that mnemonic. So you, in your mind, you picture a king, um, and his name is Philip, and he's standing in line at some sort of fast food restaurant trying to order um, fried green snakes. So picture in your mind, it's a snake in a deep fryer. It's green, and um, King Philip is there ordering it. So that's going to be your image in your head. It's going to stick into your mind a whole lot better than just repeating this list of words. And that's all of the notes for class today. Hope you have a good rest of your day.